thank you very, very much for the organisers for giving me this opportunity to talk to you about something which isn't that well known about from an RSPCA point of view. I suppose we're not very good at publicising the work we do from the science group. I am a scientific officer, senior scientific officer at the RSPCA. I'm based in the research animals department, but my remit extends across all other areas of human-animal interactions. What I'm going to present today is just one of those projects that we're working on at the moment. So I think to begin with, I should give you some data about exactly what kind of animals are used in the UK in research and laboratory, what species are used, and what kind of broad reason or purpose that they are used for. Every year, the Home Office releases statistics on the use of animals from the previous year. This is 2015's data, and as usual, the pointer doesn't work, as usual, mice tend to make up the majority of the animals that are used, make up about 3/4 of them. I've expanded a little pie chart to show you in a bit more detail other species that are used here as well. And along the bottom, I've set up a little bar chart of the broad purposes that those animals are used for. Now, the majority of the procedures that are undertaken on animals in the UK are for basic research, for fundamental research, whether that's mechanistic to find out how something works, whether it's to find out how a particular disease state arises, or whatever. Only about 10% of the experiments carried out on animals in the UK is actually of translational or truly applied research, so something that is directly translatable to the clinic or to the veterinary centre as well. So 10% doesn't seem like a very, very large proportion at all. Every 4 or 5 years, the government instructs it ipsos mori to find out about public opinion towards the use of animals in research. And over the past few surveys, it's been pretty consistent that the majority of people in the UK, 68%, something like that, will only accept the use of animals in a laboratory if it's for vital medical research. Only 10% of this could be considered to be vital medical research. So that's just to give you a bit of a background of what happens in the UK. It's going to be quite a UK-centric talk, but we can consider this could be copied and pasted throughout the world. I'm going to talk about a few big global issues in science and just how we're approaching that in the UK. So within the UK, the legislation that governs the use of animals is what we call ASPR. So from 1986, the law has since been revised on several occasions, but essentially we have a 3-tier licensing system. In order to carry out any procedure on an animal that may cause harm, distress, or suffering, you need to have 3 sets of licenses in place. So the place or the establishment at which the procedure is to be carried out has to have an establishment license. The project under which the work is to be done has to have a license itself, and the person actually carrying out the research, doing the procedure, also requires a license. In order to get hold of one of these licenses, or any 3 of these licenses, you have to undergo a certain amount of training accredited by the Home Office. So ASPR is an enabling act. It means that you can treat an animal in a way that would otherwise have you prosecuted under the Animal Welfare Act. Now, having a license means that you carry a significant responsibility towards the animals that you are treating. So, also within UK law and throughout Europe, the 3 R's are enshrined. The 3 R's: replacement, reduction, and refinement. Replacement: if an alternative to an animal is available, then it must be used. Whether that's absolute replacement, replacing the animal entirely, or whether that's using tissues, organs, or cells from the animal as relative replacement. If a replacement is available, it has to be used. Reduction: you must use only the minimum number of animals to answer that research question. Refinement is minimizing the suffering of that animal throughout its entire lifetime experience by refining the procedure, the housing, the husbandry in which that animal is experiencing. Every project, every experiment every establishment must carry out a harm-benefit assessment. And to do that, you need to define what kind of impact the procedure is going to have on the animal and what likely benefit might arise from carrying out that research. Now, determining what kind of impact that animal is going to experience is quite straightforward. Trying to determine what kind of benefit to society that research might imbue is very tricky. So it's not a straightforward process at all. And it's normally carried out in the UK by an animal welfare and ethical review body, an AWERB, which every establishment must have. Members of the AWERBs include scientists, named veterinary surgeon. They're recommended to have lay people as well, and 3 of my colleagues are members of AWERBs in different establishments around the country. So this, on paper, we go back, all sounds brilliant. Sounds like we've got everything sewn up. But what is there to worry about? We have the tightest welfare legislation pretty much in the world with regard to the use of animals in the laboratory. So why are we worried about it? Well, if I could bring in an analogy, have a bit of audience participation as well. How many people here drive a car? Pause in the air. How many people have an MOT on their car that is valid? How many people have car insurance? Good, because that's what you need to be able to drive legally. How many people stick to the speed limit all the time? All the time? Well done to you. How many people have been caught speeding? Pause in the air. Right, okay, so now think about if there are only 23 traffic police officers on the roads in this country, no cameras, and there were no prosecutions, how many people would be speeding? Most days? Every day? I think I would be. I want to get to A to B as quickly as possible. And this is the situation that we face with the use of animals in the laboratory in the UK. It's not the only issue. There's a much wider global issue as well. So about, I suppose, 15, 20 years ago, papers and articles in the mainstream media started appearing about how much of animal research is biased, it's flawed, it's poorly designed, poorly carried out, poorly analysed, poorly reported, and it's not reproducible. It also has very poor translation to the clinic, so very little clinical benefit. Now this is something that is being recognised by the scientific community. It is being recognised by the funders of research too. But this is not just an animal welfare issue. It's a huge ethical concern for many other reasons too. So while animals' lives are being wasted in the laboratory, the public purse is being squandered. If you think about it, all animal research is funded by you and me, whether it's through our taxes, whether it's through charitable donations, or whether it's through our own purchasing of drugs and medicines. So we are letting patients down, and trust in science is massively reduced too. So huge ethical issues. And copy and paste this around the world. It's not just the UK that has these problems. Why is this happening? Well, many different reasons. In the UK, at least, we have scant awareness of the available alternatives. There just doesn't seem to be a centralised resource where people can look for whether they can use 3D cell cultures instead of a whole animal, or things like that. We have poor awareness of the biology and behaviour of animals used in the laboratory. Very few people know that mice are nocturnal, that they don't rely on their eyesight as their dominant sense, things like this. We have little reflection on their own animal use. If you arrive in a new research job yourself, you're likely to be inserted into an already active research program. Protocols are already set up, the models are already in place. So there tends to be little opportunity to reflect on exactly what you're doing and why you are doing it, whether there could be a better way to do it. We have poor experimental design conduct, analysis and reporting, as we've seen in the previous slide. And there tends to be little consideration of the necessity to use animals and the justification for their use as well. Just because we've been using a particular model for a set number of years doesn't mean to say it's the most appropriate way to do the science. So we have incomplete implementation of 3Rs. This is all propped up by very minimal training provided by the Home Office. We have no training for unregulated procedures, or whether you're just using tissues, cells, whatever from an animal. We have no continual professional development beyond the Home Office modules. And so we can come to the state where a professor, principal investigator, might have done their Home Office training 30 years previously and has not had a single refresher since, despite huge technological changes and legislative changes as well. So we are facing a little bit of a problem with regards to education. So what are we doing about it? Well, this is all part of a wider education initiative that started 2 years ago. And currently we are approaching doctoral schools and graduate schools to find out what is being provided for the current PhD students. We would target the PhD students, the youngsters, tend to be more receptive. They have ownership of the PhD that they're embarking upon. It's their research baby. It will follow them for the rest of their life. They need to maximize the quality of their scientific output because that will follow them for the rest of their life too. And they're in the phase of learning. So probably best, most effective target audience there. We're engaging with institutions, with their supervisors, with their heads of doctoral school to try and embed animal welfare, ethics and the 3Rs in graduate programs. Quite fortunately, over the past few years, the landscape of doctoral training in this country has changed quite phenomenally. Way back when I did my PhD, well, back in the 90s, I was just flung straight into the lab for 3 years. Get on with it, do your thesis, off you go. Nowadays we're adopting a more US-style system, so there tend to be 4-year programs. First year is formalized training on graduate training courses, and then the following 3 years they embark upon their research program. So it's kind of a ripe opportunity for us to try and insert our own messages into that graduate training program in the first year of doctoral school. So we've been developing and disseminating teaching materials. Eventually we try to measure outcomes and hopefully ensure continual implementation as well. So, like all good experiments, we ran a pilot study. And we're quite fortunate insofar that one of our old colleagues, who's sadly now left us, well, she's not died, but she's left the group. She's now set herself up on her own, and she's continuing the same practice, but as an independent consultant. She was ex-UCL, that's where she did her postdoc, and she kept good relationships with them, and sits on the AWEB of one of their establishment licenses. UCL has 4 establishments. They carry out a lot of animal research themselves, but they tend to have quite a lot of respect for us at the RSPCA. So they agreed to let us develop a course for their doctoral training program. It was a 2-day course, 12 hours in total, 25 PhD students in the first instance, and they're all in the first year of their PhD. Now these guys, some of them were license holders already, some of them weren't. Some of them weren't using animals at all. But the idea behind developing these modules was to get the students while they're at their kind of infancy, because even if they're not using animals at the moment, they may go on to later on in their research career. The doctoral training is just the start of a research career. So they're a bit of a mixed cohort. The first group we had vets, medics, nanotechnologists, neurologists, ophthalmologists, whole mixed bag. But we had fun with them. And we developed 4 different sessions. We took them through animal use, the history of animal use, why they're still being used. Look at the very vast spectrum of opinion towards animal use as well. And we impress on them that it's very important to respect other people's opinions on the use of animals in the laboratory. We talk about public engagement and how openness and transparency is important in their work. We then move on to talk about research integrity, talk about a few of the ethical dilemmas that scientists come across during their research career, and we put them into a few ethical dilemmas and get them to talk about exactly what they would do in that situation. We also talk about the importance of experimental design, and that's when it gets really sciencey. Talk about statistics, analysis, what defines an experimental unit, and look at how to avoid common pitfalls. So we got really good feedback from that. And but it's not a measure of behavioural change in itself, is it? We're good at measuring education outcomes, but not behavioural change. I've just been told to finish, so I'll get through this. So what I wanted to kind of finish off with you is that although an animal welfare-minded student might declare that they are going to implement something, change once they get back into the laboratory, when they're out of the safety of the classroom and they're back in the lab, they face a very different culture. Very competitive environment, high-level competition for jobs and funding, short-term contracts are rife, there's very high staff turnover. There's perceived funding shortage, and they're in this publish or perish environment. You have to get your study published as quickly as possible in the best journal possible. There's a huge amount of bias in publications as well, so the tendency to publish only positive results or statistically significant results. So there's a huge incentive to cut corners and cherry pick, and that has been quite well publicised recently. So we're continuing to engage with universities and colleges, but I just wanted to kind of leave you with this message that Justine spoke about, my colleague Justine, to work together. In a field like animal research, it inspires some very strongly held emotive responses to it. And unfortunately, in the past, some of those have been associated with violence as well. And to get open communication between all stakeholders is still quite tricky. But it's important to put aside any positional issues on this and focus on the common goal, which is to get animals out of the research laboratory completely. Thank you.